200 years ago, America looked familiar, but it felt completely different. There were no engines, no glowing screens, no constant noise in the background, just people, land, and time moving slowly. Tonight, we are not talking about dates or famous names. We are talking about something quieter, what it actually felt like to wake up, to work, to rest, and to fall asleep in America around the early 1800s. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you may realize that while life was harder back then, it was also calmer in ways we no longer experience. Morning did not begin with an alarm. It began with light. As the sun slowly rose, it entered homes through small windows. People woke when their bodies were ready, not when a clock demanded it. Most Americans lived in rural areas at this time. Farms, small towns, and open land defined daily life. The first sounds of the morning were simple: footsteps on wooden floors, the crackle of a fire being started, animals moving outside. Breakfast was basic: bread, milk, sometimes eggs, or leftovers from the night before. Food was not about comfort. It was about survival. Work began early and lasted most of the day. Men, women, and children all worked in some way. Farming, repairing tools, sewing clothes, chopping wood, carrying water. Nothing was wasted. Clothes were repaired again and again. Tools were passed down through families. Even small objects held value. Travel was slow. Walking was common. Horses were precious. A journey of just a few miles could take hours. Travel between towns could take days. Time moved differently when everything required effort. News did not arrive instantly. There were no phones, no radio, no daily news alerts. Information traveled by letter or by traveler. Sometimes people learned about major events weeks later, sometimes not at all. This meant people lived mostly in the present. Their world was their family, their neighbors, and their land. As the sun set, the day slowed down. There was no electricity to extend the night. Candles and oil lamps provided soft, limited light. Families gathered close together. Someone might read aloud. Someone might tell a familiar story. Silence was common, and it was not uncomfortable. Outside, the night sky was dark and full of stars, much brighter than what we see today. The sky reminded people how small they were and how large the world was. Strangely, this brought comfort. Life was fragile. Illnesses that are easily treated today were dangerous then. Injuries could become fatal. People understood this. Death was not hidden. It was part of daily life. Fear existed, but it was not constant. People accepted uncertainty because they had no other choice. They lived fully in the time they had. Community mattered deeply. Neighbors depended on one another. If a barn burned down, people helped rebuild. If a harvest failed, food was shared. Survival was collective. No one truly lived alone. When night came, the world rested. No traffic, no electric hum, only wind, insects, and distant animals. Sleep was deep, not because life was easy, but because days were honest and physical. The body rested, and so did the mind. Life in America 200 years ago was harder. There is no doubt about that. But it was also slower, quieter, more grounded. People lived inside their days. And while we would not trade our modern comforts, the past reminds us that calm once came naturally. Sometimes, looking back helps us understand what we are still searching for. Moving from one place to another was not simple. There were roads, but many were rough, uneven, and muddy. Rain could turn a short journey into a long struggle. Most people traveled on foot. Some used horses or wagons. A trip that takes an hour today could take an entire day back then. Because of this, people planned carefully. Travel was not casual. When someone left home, it mattered. Goodbyes were slower, and returns were uncertain. Distance felt larger when it demanded effort, physical effort, that required attention and patience. Farming was the backbone of life. Fields were prepared by hand. Seeds were planted carefully. Harvests depended on weather, timing, and experience. There were no guarantees. A year of hard work could be undone by a storm, a drought, or an early frost. This uncertainty shaped how people thought. They planned carefully. They saved when they could. They avoided waste. Nothing was taken for granted. Inside the home, life was just as demanding. Cooking took hours. Meals were prepared from scratch, often over open fire. Food preservation was essential. Meat was salted or smoked. Vegetables were dried or stored. Nothing could be wasted. Women carried a heavy burden of responsibility. Their work never truly stopped. They managed food, clothing, children, and the household itself. Their knowledge was practical and deep. They understood seasons, health, and survival. Children learned early, by watching and helping. There was little separation between childhood and adulthood. Responsibility came early. Education existed, but it was not universal. Some towns had small schools. Others relied on parents or community members to teach. Reading and writing were valued, but daily survival mattered more. Books were rare and expensive. Those who owned them treated them with care. Learning often came through stories, experience, and observation. As people grew older, their roles shifted, but their usefulness did not end. Elders were respected for their experience and memory. They remembered seasons, storms, hard years, and lessons learned. Their knowledge guided decisions. Health was fragile. Medicine was limited. Doctors existed, but many relied on home remedies. Illness could spread quickly. Infections were dangerous. Even small injuries could become serious. People accepted this risk. They lived with awareness that life could change suddenly. Death was present, but it was not hidden. Families mourned openly. Loss was part of life, not something spoken about in whispers. Despite hardship, there were moments of joy. Music existed. Simple instruments, fiddles, voices raised together. Songs were passed down, not written. Stories were shared by memory. Laughter mattered. It relieved tension and strengthened bonds. Social gatherings were important. Markets, church meetings, and seasonal events brought people together. Church played a central role for many. It was not only spiritual, but social. It offered structure, community, and shared values. Sundays were quieter. Work slowed or stopped. People rested, reflected, and connected. Time moved at a different pace. When rest was respected, holidays were simple. They marked seasons, harvests, or religious events. Celebrations did not rely on abundance. They relied on togetherness. Homes reflected their owners. They were not decorated for appearance, but for function. Every object had a purpose. Rooms were used efficiently. Space was shared. Privacy was limited, but isolation was rare. At night, families gathered close. Candles were used sparingly. Stories filled the darkness. Silence followed. Outside, the world rested. Nature did not sleep, but it quieted. Crickets, wind, and distant animals formed the night's soundtrack. Sleep was deep. Physical work demanded rest. Minds were not overstimulated. Thoughts slowed naturally. Dreams came easily. The passage of time felt steady. Days were long. Years passed slowly. People measured life, not by milestones, but by seasons. Spring meant planting. Summer meant labor. Autumn meant harvest. Winter meant survival. This rhythm shaped expectations. Change happened gradually. Technology advanced slowly. Generations lived similarly to those before them. This continuity created a strong sense of identity. People knew where they came from. They knew their place. Yet life was not without tension. Disagreements happened. Conflicts arose. Resources were limited. Not everyone prospered. Poverty existed. Hardship was real. But people adapted. They shared when possible. They endured when necessary. Community softened the edges of struggle. As America grew, change began to accelerate. But 200 years ago, most people lived without awareness of what was coming. They lived in the present. They focused on immediate needs. They accepted limits. They understood effort. Looking back now, it is easy to romanticize the past. Life was not easier. It was demanding, but it was grounded. People were connected to their environment, their work, and each other. Noise was rare. Distraction was limited. Attention stayed close to home. In this quieter world, people understood themselves differently. They were shaped by routine, labor, and patience. They learned endurance. They accepted uncertainty. They lived slower lives, not by choice, but by necessity. And in that slowness, they found a different kind of calm. As years passed, people grew familiar with uncertainty. They learned to live without guarantees. Plans were made, but always with flexibility. If the weather changed, so did the day. If illness came, everything paused. Life adjusted itself around reality, not expectation. This way of living created resilience. People did not expect ease. They expected effort. And when something went wrong, they adapted. Instead of resisting, money existed, but it was not central to daily survival. Barter was common. Skills mattered more than possessions. A person who could repair tools, grow food, or heal the sick was valuable. Wealth was measured in usefulness, not excess. Entertainment was simple.